So today, we're going to be talking about how we look at ourselves as biracials.
Yeah.
That sounded weird as
It does
biracials.
as a biracial.
Let me start again.
It's like we're some kind of weird
Right.
alien species.
So today, we're going to talk about how we view ourselves as biracial, Korean, and white. Black for me.
As biracials.
Yeah, this is very interesting in that I think if you ask anybody who is mixed race or, multicultural, you'll get a whole slew of answers that differ. But you're going to get the answers from us. So we don't represent everybody, of course. But I think this is something that is important to talk about so that you guys that are listening who may be in the same shoes can relate to us, or if you're just like interested in how mixed people look at themselves, I think this would be interesting for you because this is something I think about all the time, especially the fact that we live in Korea. I'm reminded of this so much more than when I lived in the States. I don't know about you.
I just had a flashback.
Yeah.
When you said that, I just remembered being in grade school and then you had to fill out like tests, like the Scantron stuff. And then it would ask you to put your ethnicity. And I remember it would say white, Hispanic, African American, Asian, Pacific Islander.
Yeah.
And I always would vacillate between putting white or Asian, but I always was like, I didn't know what to put.
You should put black.
Yeah, right. You're not gonna give me my option anyway. So yeah, I always remember being like, what should I pick? I feel like more often than not, if it was Asian Pacific Islander put together, I would just tag that one. I remember doing that.
I feel like a lot of half Korean kids, because I grew up with a lot of half Koreans, I feel like a lot of them did the same thing.
Just put Asian, right?
Yeah. I remember always just being mad as a kid that there wasn't an option for like biracial. And so
You're actually upset about that? Filling out your Scantron, you're like,
I just remember, I remember being bothered by that. But
remember when they put other? Sometimes you get the Scantron
yeah,
that said other.
You know what? There were like different.
That always made me
There were
happy.
different periods of like different sorts of options. So I
Yeah.
don't know if that was like a standardized thing or just
Yeah.
like random. But yeah, I used to put African American because I remember like on my birth certificate it says black. It doesn't even say.
Really?
It don't say nothing about Asian or Korean.
I don't know what
Except my
mine
mom's
says.
name. That's it. Yeah, mine says black because I think at the time especially it was sort of an understood thing that whatever the father's race is what goes on your birth certificate.
That's big. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if they do that anymore. I would
then
imagine that they don't.
Maybe mine just says white then.
Maybe.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you should ask your dad. Yeah, so, I think we, even as kids, we had at least some degree of self-awareness that we're different and that we have different things that we can represent. And I think for me, this is something I think about, again, because I think you and I would probably differ a little bit on how we view ourselves.
I think so.
So let me ask you this. Generally speaking, if you could give an answer in a couple of sentences, how do you view yourself as the biracial, white American, and Korean?
What? This is very hard. Okay. I'm really struggling with that because I've been thinking about it since yesterday. Because we've been talking about this.
Oh. So why were you thinking about
Just
it?
yesterday. Prior to that, I never thought about race. No, but I mean, like, because I try to reflect back on growing up that I don't think I ever answered to people, I'm white. Like, growing up, I don't think I ever said that to people, actually. Which is funny because, yeah, I don't know, I just never did.
What'd you say?
I just said I was Korean. I think this.
Just totally neglect.
I think
the
I
other
said
half, huh?
that
Yeah.
I was just Korean because it was just. I think
That's interesting.
either the way I viewed things, it wasn't nuanced enough growing up. I never heard the terminology. I never considered myself Korean American because Korean Americans felt very distinctly separate. Korean Americans were their own thing. So I knew I wasn't Korean American, but I also never identified myself as white given the opportunity when people asked me. And then, usually the way it was addressed in the States, people would be like, so you Chinese or Japanese? What
Right.
are you? So then
Classic.
so of course for me in that instance, I'm not going to go out of my way to educate someone who doesn't even know more than 2 Asian countries. So I just said, yeah, I'm just Korean.
Yo, one time, and this was when I was an adult, but before I moved to New Jersey like 10 years ago, I was working at this electronics store in the city, part-time. And I told this girl, yeah, I'm half Korean. And she was like, where is that? Is that near Mexico?
So yeah.
So we haven't come a long way from the
by
time
the
you were a
Texas
child
border.
to 10 years ago. So I was like, okay, I'll let that pass. Because, to be honest, I'm very ignorant about, a lot of countries and cultures myself. So, I'll let that slide. And she didn't mean any harm by it.
No.
But I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I don't even know where you come back from that.
So I guess you probably viewed yourself more as Korean, you think? Growing up, at least.
I don't know. I really, really don't know. What did I view myself as? I mean, I think I knew what outside people viewed me as. Mm-hmm. So did that form the way I viewed myself? Or did I already have prior to that a good solid concept? You know what I mean?
Because people will be quick, especially kids, to point out to you what they think you are.
Of course. The very first time that someone ever did like the Chinky Eyes to me, it didn't register that they were doing it to me. Like, because it was in the hallway and then he would do like the Chinky Eyes every time I passed him. And I was very confused because I was like, what does that mean? And why is he doing that to me? So I remember I asked my dad actually, and he had to explain to me like, what it meant. And I was very like, why would he do that to me? I don't get it. So I remember looking in the mirror and just like looking at my eyes and being like, is that what you look like? So again, see, does that really form though my identity, my racial identity, or is this simply reflective of how people treated me? I'm not really sure.
Right. It could be a combination of both, honestly. So I guess it's sort of not super clear with you then.
Yeah. I mean, it was very obvious when I was with Koreans that I wasn't Korean. That to me, I definitely could feel from a young age.
I mean, at least you knew that you were mixed though, right?
Yeah, but I don't think, again, you think in those terms in your mind.
Well, I guess for you, it might be a little different because with me, like that was a clear concept. Even when I was younger in elementary school, I knew what that was. I knew a lot of people that were biracial. I knew a lot of, especially in the area, I grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, near a military town. And so we had a bunch of multiracial families comparatively, I guess, to like a lot of parts of the world. And we had a lot of black and white kids. We had a good handful of half Koreans, which again,
so curious to me.
Yeah, it's so funny because you say you barely grew up around half Koreans. I grew up around a bunch of half Koreans. They were like my main friend group. But I think all of that does play a part in, I guess, how you view yourself, especially as a kid. But me, I had that self-awareness, I think. But I never actually looked at myself like I was Korean as a kid. I knew I was half Korean. I knew my mom was Korean. But based off of my appearance, I felt like I just felt like it was easier for me to identify more with my black side in the sense of appearance.
Well, see, that's the thing. It's not a matter of acceptance then, because that's just being easier, falling to the place of least resistance.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mirror or reflect exactly how you viewed yourself.
No, I mean, but that had a part to play because like what I saw in the mirror was more closely related to, like my black friends. I mean, yeah, granted, I also tried to, adapt to to the styles that, my black friends in that area, how they would dress and the things like that. So of course, all of that has a part to play and is a variable. But whenever I saw like Korean kids, or anyone who was Korean, I knew clearly I didn't look like that. I just didn't. Now, looking back, I recognize that I looked mixed. I think a lot of people who grow up mixed, especially like half black, half anything, 9 times out of 10, we could point out like other mixed people. Like, oh, that person's half black, or at least mixed with black and something else, or black and Asian. So I knew that. I knew I had that look, but I just didn't feel like I looked Korean.
I think you're right that a lot of mixed people either can point out to each other, but whatever their other respective side isn't as easy able to point out that,
right.
Well, you're mixed, and so it's hard to accept these two mutually exclusive concepts into
Generally, yes, I would agree with that, but I do think that black folk, especially in the States, we can definitely pick out mixed people a lot more easier than anyone else. Like, because I think a lot of African Americans, we are quite mixed up. You know, if you go down the line, we're mixed with, you know, sometimes Native American, sometimes with white, but we're mostly black, you know. So I think we have that understanding, that experience, and we're like, oh, we know this person's definitely one of us, but, you know, mixed with a little something in there, a little swirly or something like that. So I think a lot of black folk can definitely tell if someone's mixed.
This is so interesting hearing this, because it's like what I mentioned earlier, the path of least resistance. Or the fact that you say that they'll be like, oh, one of us mixed with something. That already indicates, oh, you can more easily fall into the side, more embraced into the side, while still being able to acknowledge your mixedness.
Right.
While I felt like growing up with white people, there's no way that they would say, oh, you're one of us.
You're just Asian.
In Koreans, there's
You're
no
different.
way they would say you're one of us.
That's true.
So there was no path of least resistance.
Right. And that is that's a very big thing that you just brought up, because generally black people, and I'm speaking from like experience in the States, black people, they'll embrace you. You know what I mean? If you're half black, or even if you're like quarter black, you're like, hey, you know, you got some swag in you.
That's what.
You know, and there's this like embracing that happens generally.
Yeah.
You might get joked on here and there, but overall you're going to be accepted.
This is something that I felt, okay, this is also a little bit out of the spectrum, but it kind of relates to this. Remember when I told you I was listening to that podcast and they were talking about Meghan Markle and Harry's kid, Archie? Yeah. And then one of the guys was white and one of the speakers was black, and they were both like, I don't understand what's all this furor over this child. Like, why is everyone so crazy about this kid? And then the guy who's black who was speaking was like, I don't care if people say that kid is black. His mom is half black.
Right.
And I was like, wow.
Right.
I would never hear Korean people, let's say, if I had a kid that was, you know, quarter Korean, I would never hear them say like, what are you talking about? That kid is Korean because the mom's half Korean. Never. And I was very impressed by this. And I think I told you that, remember? Yeah, exactly. So I think that has a big part to play in probably how we viewed ourselves too. Yeah. Because I did grow up around, you know, my black family, in that like we saw them consistently every year. And I also had just a lot of black friends. So I just always felt like, oh, you know, they embraced me. Not that I felt like the Korean people that I hung out with didn't, but the Korean people were more quick to point out that I was mixed or half Korean. They still loved me and embraced me, of course, but the black folk, they don't even have to point out your other side. They're like, you're just one of us. So that's been my experience. And I think that has shaped how I viewed myself as well, in addition to how I look, you know, because I could, even though I didn't look, you know, I just look, I don't know, I look like a little Hawaiian kid or something. I don't know. You know, but like I pass more on the black side, especially growing up. So I think that, you know, is a big part to play in terms of how I look at myself, even today. I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a way, I kind of feel a little sad, because I think that is so lovely. At least, even if not both sides can understand you, at least having one side that's just like, that's cool.
Right. I'm telling you, man, like, just black folk, they're very welcoming, you know, like they'll take you in, especially when they sense a respect. But if you're like, you know, if you're one of them, you know, whether it's fully or even partly, they'll take you in. So that's what I love. Whereas I don't necessarily feel the same way about like my Korean side, because it's just different. And if you listen to our previous episode, we talk a lot about like the history of like, or the importance of understanding the history of Korean culture. And, you know, that's where they develop their framework, but it's just different. You know what I mean? So I think for me now, I have more of a realistic view of who I am. Okay. Like, and what I mean by that is, I know that genetically I'm half and half.
You pretty are. You know, we did the DNA test. I don't know how accurate that was. Remember, you're like 49% Korean ethnicity. Remember?
I thought it was like Asian or something like that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Never mind. Just ignore what I said. We need to retake that DNA test anyhow.
We need to do another company, yeah. But, you know, so now I have more of a, just I guess a realistic view of like it's nature and nurture, right? Nature in that genetically I am who I am. I'm a mix of my dad and mom. I mean, not necessarily 50% in terms of how genes actually work, but like close enough, right?
I'm pretty sure you're 50% mom and 50% your
Well,
dad.
yeah, but you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah, I know.
so I have that understanding, but I also know that my look has a lot to play, because if I looked 100% black, even though I was half Korean, or if I looked 100% Korean, even though I was half black, I feel like I would look at myself a little differently.
Yeah,
like my experiences would be
Yeah, because
different.
your experiences.
Yeah, I think people would look at me differently. People would treat me differently. I think Korean people would treat me differently, not necessarily in a bad way. It was just because it's more familiar. If I looked more Korean, you know, maybe had a little tan, but like just everything else looked Korean. So I mean, there's so many factors and variables, and there's, you know, not a definitive answer of how, you know, people look at you, but
Yes.
what I'm saying is just now I'm a little bit more like, okay, now I understand I could take a macro level approach in looking at myself in situation. But in terms of how I feel, even to today, I still feel, knowing that I'm half Korean, half black, I've never once felt like, oh, I feel Korean. Whereas,
But you have said, I feel like I'm black.
like in terms of like relating to like black culture as I know it from the States, yeah, for sure. Like it's so much easier for me to say that versus, oh, I feel Korean. I have, like, if you look at it logically, I could claim either side because I'm half of each and I grew up around both, but I feel almost like an imposter if I say, oh, I feel Korean or I am Korean. I think it might be different if I grew up here. I probably wouldn't feel as much as
Maybe.
like an imposter.
Maybe.
I would still feel different for sure. Yeah.
That's a very good point. I don't. Yeah. It's very weird because, again, I'm trying to differentiate between how you speak in order for the outside world to relate or understand versus how I really view myself. Because I was just about to say, oh, depending on whom I'm talking with, that will change how I respond. But that shouldn't be the definitive way you identify yourself.
Right.
That's very difficult. But yeah, I don't think I can ever. I think I'm more likely to say first Korean to somebody who doesn't really know versus, oh, I'm white. Because I think, again, depending on who I'm speaking with, that person may accept it right off the bat, which is just easier, or be like, no, you're not. You know? Because I don't think I could say to anybody, I'm white. And they will just be like, oh, yeah.
That makes sense,
I
right?
see, right. No one, I don't think, could do that. But
Right.
depending on whom I'm talking to, I could say, I'm Korean. Be like, yeah, move on.
Yeah. Whereas if I say I'm black, I'd be like, oh, yeah, I'm Korean. I even thought about this. Like, you know, I did that video talking about my story growing up black and Korean. I had that thumbnail of me, right? Just my face.
Yeah.
And if you haven't watched that video, actually, because I know there's a lot of people that have subscribed since then, you may not have seen it, watch that video. It gives you an overview of my life. But yeah, like I always imagine, you know, me doing a video, and I might still do it, who knows, where I just put on the thumbnail my face and say, I'm Korean, and see what kind of response I'd get.
Oh, no. You are just waiting for the waves of internet hate to come.
But, you know, if I were to say I'm black,
It would be totally different.
it would.
Yeah.
And it's weird. I understand why, but it's weird. And it's not fair.
What a great social experiment.
Yeah. So we might do something like
Yeah,
that.
and they'll release a video.
Just to kind of test
I'm
it.
Korean, and then one that's the same picture. So I'm white, and then see how much hate we get.
Yeah. So anyways,
by the way, I'm saying these terms and, you know, throwing it out amusingly, not because it actually really hurts us anymore, but just because it's the reality.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, to answer that question, that's sort of how I view myself, even at this point. But I do know that deep down inside, at the end of the day, I am both.
See, this is the thing when we're talking about biracial identity and this is why we constantly have these conversations. This is why this channel exists. This is why the Happy Project exists. This is why, you know, to some people, it's like you're speaking ad nauseum about these mixed race things. What's the big deal? Because the fact remains is that there is no definitive final point. being mixed, being biracial, there's no 50% here, 50% there. We can easily draw the line in between and see where you stand. It's all of this mix and combination and nuances that require these peeling back of layers through conversation and discussion, so that what has been mysterious and so vague before just becomes, the common fact. And that's why we talk about these things. Because as you see, even now, do we have a definitive answer to you to describe this is what it means to me being biracial? No.
You would think we would at this point, given what we
think.
do and our experiences, but no, even still.
The important thing is these conversations and this exploration of self-identity, and especially for our viewers who are still going on that journey, it's very valid. I think that's what I want to point out.
That's a good point. Very good point. So if you're not down, for these kind of conversations, we talk about it a lot on this channel, just don't watch the video. Because some of y'all get all mad and leaving comments like, why y'all always talking about being half this or talking about race?
So
blah,
I'm
blah, blah.
so sorry. Let me eliminate half of it so I can suit your concept
Right.
of
That
what
is
it should be.
that is one of the points of this channel, to
Yeah.
have these sorts of
That's
discussions.
right.
Yeah. So hopefully you guys appreciate that. Thank you all so much for watching. It's been fun today. And if you are not subscribed to this podcast, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And also, if you're watching on YouTube at the Skycedi YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe there for more uploads and the video version of the podcast. We'll see you next week. Don't forget to follow us on social media. It'll be on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. Yeah, we'll see you next week. Peace.
Peace.